Hey folks, it's bEcpmPvY, and it is time for another deck tech. So it's time to take a look at another deck as we continue exploring the new meta, dealing with all the different things that have come out through the expansions and rotations, and it's time for me to get to something that I've wanted to do pretty much since we saw the rotations. So it's time to go back to our roots, or at least back to the roots of some of us who've been playing cards for a little bit longer. We're going to go back to US Frontline. As ever, I'm a Cards Content Creator, member of the Contributor Program. You can find all the links and stuff down below. Talk about all sorts of different stuff, cards related, not cards related. No, just check out the YouTube channels, join the Discord, support if you possibly can. But let's talk about what we're doing deck-wise today. And what we are doing deck-wise today is looking at a deck that's been around a very long time, and that's US-Germany Frontline. So, US-Germany Frontline's been around, I mean, I've not been around since the beginning of the game, but US-Germany Frontline pretty much has. It's an incredibly venerable old mid-range deck. And what we mean by mid-range is, or at least what I mean by mid-range, is a deck that trades, that focuses on good value on board, trading, playing smart, thinking your turns through, getting the best value out of your units, and winning just through steady progress. US Frontline has always been kind of really good at this because US and Germany have both had a good kind of quantity and weighting of value units. But Frontline kind of was really struggling for a while, and I've tried a few times in the past, as many people who've watched me stream and create content will know, to bring US Frontline back with different allies and in different ways. But with the new expansion and the return of a number of classic US Frontline cards, Red Devils and Half Track among them, I was quite excited to see if I could make US Frontline reasonable. And I think I did. It was decent. It's going to be the usual deal. I'm going to take you through the deck, talk about the tactics. Then at the end, there's going to be some gameplay with commentary from me on the games that I have played through so that you can get an idea of how I play the deck. The deck code will be down below so that you can import it and use it if you want. And as usual, let me know in the comments if there's any opinions, thoughts, whether you have any success with the deck, and generally speaking, I hope you enjoy it. But let's actually hop over and just go through the deck itself. Right, we are in the client, and in front of us is my US-Germany Frontline deck. So we'll do this the classic way. We're just going to go from the top. So we have the Venerable and Returned Red Devils. This card is still basically cracked. This is a great special. It doesn't look like a lot. It does have what we consider magic stats, though. 1/3 for a Blitz Infantry in a deck that wants to trade. If you can get this into the front line round turn 2, you're in good place, because 1/3 is awkward stats for aggro to trade into and gives you a body that you can start building on into slower decks. And this one is particularly potent because it has the text that causes it to make the enemy spend 1 extra credit anytime they target or attack this, which makes it incredibly awkward to remove. Red Devils is still an incredibly effective tool, a little bit less so than it used to be, but it's still pretty solid, and I certainly don't regret having it in the deck. We've got 3 Greyhound, well, 1 short of a full set. Now, there's a discussion here between the Greyhound, obviously here, but we can also talk about the Scout Car, if I just narrow this down to tanks. The M20 is also occasionally brought into the argument because it's the same stats, but it does have technically an upside. However, I have found in the current situation that the upside doesn't proc effectively enough. There's too much risk that you're dropping it and having to target an early enemy 1-drop, at which point the problem is, if you're playing it, you can't choose not to target something, and if the opponent has a body down and this is the only 1-drop you've got, then you have to target them with that card, and they will get the buff, which you really don't want to do, particularly if you drop it on something, say, like buffs, which is a nightmare scenario. So I have found that it is better to just go back to the venerable old Greyhound. 30-second infantry. I mean, the Choco Boys. This is just deck thinning on a stick. Probably a good time to talk about deck thinning for anyone who's not familiar with it. By deck thinning, what we mean, or at least what I mean, is any card that is reducing the density of your deck. So what this card does is that, obviously, it's a cheap infantry with fairly indifferent stats, although it does have 2 attacks, so your opponent does need to deal with it at some point, otherwise they could be in trouble. But ultimately, its biggest advantage is when you deploy it, you automatically draw another copy of it from the deck. And then, if you can afford to deploy the second one, that will draw the third one, and if you can deploy the third one, that'll draw the fourth one, at which point, effectively, once you've drawn one of these, you've reduced your deck size by 4, which increases the mathematical chance of you seeing all of the other cards in your deck while giving you cheap units to put on the board. Effectively, this kind of deck thinning is really important because there are lots of tools that we want to see in the toolbox, and in the meantime, having disposable bodies to trade things out. Because this thing can trade well. With 2 attack, this thing can uptrade. It can trade into something and get more value than itself. There are a few targets out there that you can use to help it trade with. 2 copies of For Freedom. I love this card. I will endlessly advocate that this card is, for the most part, in any US main deck and most US ally decks. For me, this is just a straight 2 of. It's not big, it's not flashy, it doesn't do anything special. It is just +1/+1 and draw a card, but +1/+1 and draw a card for 1 credit is really good value. And that's all that we're about. And that +1/+1 can increase the trade value of your units, which is, of course, also what we're all about. 109th Combat Engineers. This is just a threat your opponent has to do something about, or they will very quickly wish they had. It doesn't look particularly impressive. It's not really doing anything itself. And you can look at the effect and go, is +1 attack when you move into the front line really that big? Well, no, on 1 unit it's not, but when we're throwing out a lot of units that already have decent speed and tempo, but also good attack value, this suddenly becomes much, much stronger. And if your opponent doesn't answer it, it can very quickly create a front line that can be devastating. And yes, it's morning. I'm having coffee. If you're watching this in your morning, I hope you too have good coffee. 2 copies of Verbal Wind. This is, this is just a really good blitz tank. Before you get into anything else as a special, 2/3 blitz, 1 op cost is decent, especially if you're the 109th hits it, because then this is 3/3. But also, the frontline effect can be pretty effective. Certainly against, for example, the RAF Mustang, which is going to be super common in any British matchups that you see. Having it come in pinned takes away the blitz value on that. Same, of course, is true of any of the blitz aircraft that you'll come across. But no, it's enter the battlefield, so they don't have to be played. This will also pin HMS Illustrious, just FYI, it's good value. It slows anything that's trying to come at you with blitz air units, but generally we also just love it because it's a good value trading tank. 2/3 is decent stats, means you can trade it smart. Speaking of being able to trade it smart, this is a magnificent 7th, and this was the biggest competition. I currently have a 2-2 split, but you could run 2 extra 7th over the Verbal Wind, and I think it would probably not be too far off. I think the Verbal Wind being a tank gives it the edge, but Magnificent 7th has a much stronger upside because it has obviously 4 defense, which helps a bit, but much more importantly, it has the when this unit attacks, top unit of your deck gets +1/+1, and in a deck where we are only talking about value, obviously, turning the next card to be 1 point of attack, 1 point of defense better is going to increase its trade value. And that trade value is everything that we're running on. So I like the Magnificent 7th. I could see an argument for cutting down somewhere to make room for 2 more of them. But at the moment, 2-2 split's been working quite well. Panzer 35T, old as the hills, as it were. Core set card, I believe. Absolutely goated. This card is insane in any good tempo deck. 2 cost, comes down as a 2/2 with blitz, but also if you've got an infantry on the board, it comes down at 0 op cost, and a 2/2 blitz tank with 0 op cost is insane. A 3/2, if you have the 109th blitz tank with 0 op cost, is just cracked. This is just fundamentally one of the hearts of this deck. Thunderbolt. I wasn't sure if Frontline had run for this card. In fact, on first read, I was pretty sure it didn't, but I was wrong. You can watch my reviews of the rotations and the additions and the new cards, and I wasn't convinced until I got a chance to playtest it and chat to a few very smart humans, and yeah, actually this is better than I thought it would be. The stats alone are insane. 3/5 is really good. Shock is powerful, although it's debatable how often we get to actually leverage shock with this, because usually if we end up getting this into the front line, our opponent will just do anything they can to remove or trade it out, but that's usually okay because that devalues a lot of stuff. It does have the whole pseudo draw thing, so draw 2, choose a card in hand and put it on top of your deck, and that can be a tempo loss, except if you build your deck well it shouldn't be, which you can build this deck lean enough that it can survive, which was the thing I was dubious about. Generally speaking, you'll do just fine putting something back on top. It's just a matter of thinking about what you want to cycle back for next turn, and being okay effectively losing a draw on this. But the stats are probably worth it. That said, of the elites, this is probably not super critical. You could probably lose this and add. If you don't have this, I would definitely, if you're missing this elite and you don't want to craft an elite, and you probably shouldn't be just burning elite crafts until you've tested a deck a bit, I'd just put another Magnificent Seventh in. You're probably going to hear that a lot from me. We have 2 extra Magnificent Seventh we can run, so if you're missing elites, they're a pretty good choice. Speaking of elites, 327th Pathfinders. I love this card, some people don't. This is a card that requires you to use it very, very cleverly. Especially at the moment. So you have to be super careful. It used to be that this card was just an insane tempo tool. That really there was very little downside to when it veterans, because obviously the big key here is once you've dealt 2 damage to a unit, if that unit is destroyed, this becomes a veteran, and as long as this is a veteran on the board at the start of your turn, a random enemy unit retreats. Now, obviously if you're already occupying the front line, that means a random enemy unit gets bounced back to hand. Now, it used to be, as I say, a superb tempo edge with basically no downside most of the time. Nowadays, you have to really pay attention to how many deployment effects your opponent has. So for some of you, this may be a card that you cut. And again, if it's a card that you cut or you find isn't working for you, or you don't like the way that you end up using this tool, just put another Magnificent Seventh in the deck. They just trade out really beautifully 1 for 1. M10A1, I am such a big fan of this. Suppress is really, really important a lot of the time in the meta at the minute. There's some debate in the setup between this Hellcat and Half Track, and I'll talk about that when I've gone through all 3 cards. But this is suppress on a body, and it's suppress on a good body. This is light years better than duress, unless you desperately need suppress in the early game. And if you desperately need suppress in the early game with the way that this deck is built, then you've probably already lost, because you should be mulliganing for 1-drops and being able to get board presence and trading, which means you shouldn't be using a 0-cost card slot for suppression when you can get a 4/2 body on top of it. We also have the M18 Hellcat. This is the 4/2 Blitz that deals double damage against tanks. This is incredible into a lot of the big potent tanks on the board, because this is 8 damage into any tank, so heavy armor 1, 6 defense tank still just blows up to this. Definitely something to be aware of. Also can be an incredible finisher, because 3 to deploy it, 1 to push it to the front line, then 3 more. So if you've got 7 credits and a good front line, you can push this to the front line, drop a blitzkrieg, and you've probably got lethal. This is an incredibly potent tool that you will use a lot of. I definitely think the 2 of is worth it. We're not going to talk about blitzkrieg yet. We'll start with the half tracks. This is the M16 half track. This is the 3rd of the 3-cost tank boys. This is a 2-2. But it has deployment, an enemy air or infantry unit must retreat. Now, this is where we get to, you're going to have to judge this based on how the deck plays for you and what metas you're into. These 6 slots are super flexible, because you can easily run 3 half tracks or 3 M10s and less Hellcats or less half tracks or less M10s. Basically, there are 6 slots and you have any breakdown that you want. I think the 2 Hellcats is probably always worth keeping unless you're in a very weird meta, but the balance between half track and M10 can be harder. I've had moments where I've been running just 1 half track and 3 M10s. But the half-track bounce can be really, really good. There are times when it can reset. Because the other thing that this is very, very good at doing is not only does it bounce the card, but it resets the card. So the power that this has over the M10 is, while it is slightly less immediate in that it doesn't just switch the thing off, it bounces it to hand, switches it off, and makes your opponent pay for it again. So this is a more cautious tool. You can use it as a tempo tool to basically cause your opponent to be overspending credits, which is, at the right times in a mid-game, really powerful. Also, occasionally, it can just clear a guard so you can win, or push something out the front line so you can take it. Only one of those 2 things can the M10 do. If the M10 hits something in the front line, it can make it easier to trade, but you still have to trade it. If the half track hits it, it can clear the front line so that you can get into it. Anyway, just something to be aware of. Blitzkrieg, I've got this down as a 2 of. If you're newer to the deck and you're short on some other cards, you could definitely try and run 3. That you've got enough Germany slots. We don't max out our 12 Germany slots in this deck. Not just because there's some bond in this deck, primarily because we just don't need a lot of them. But it makes it just that little bit more common to find your finisher. But honestly, I think you don't need to. 2 is usually a good number. Many top players have been known to run only 1 Blitzkrieg because the argument is you only ever need 1 finisher. My counter argument is, unless you're an incredibly good player who knows exactly how to play things out, having the redundancy of being more likely to find that finisher kind of helps. The M4 Sherman, this has forever and a day been the big draw engine, and still kind of is. If you're competing for the front line, then you should be able to get the deployment effect on this. And even if you're not, it is a 4-4 body. But it is a 4-4 body with 2 op costs, so it's kind of slow. But it's still critical to me. You still need this. I've tried testing without it. Tried a bunch of alternate ideas, trying to take different pseudo draws and stuff. It's just not as good. You need this card. Whether you need 4 of them is more debatable. I think you could probably cut to 3 and still be doing fine. If you wanted to make room again for some more early game, this would be another place where you could get another Magnificent 7th if you're finding you want to be a bit more aggressive. 101st Airborne. This card has become goated for me over the years simply because I've lost count of the number of games where I've been able to get 1 big swing turn and come up 1 or 2 points short of lethal, but my opponent then retakes the front line and I drop this and win instantly because it's target in the enemy support line, which includes HQ. And obviously, if you can get it into the front line on turn 5, it has ambush. And 4 attack ambush is pretty difficult to trade out well. Definitely worth including if you have it. Could probably live without it if you don't. 5th Rangers, a card I don't think you can live without. I know there is some debate. So I love the 5th Rangers for its versatility because you can choose to either give it and deploy it as a 4-4 with 0 op cost or an 8-8 with 4 op cost. Why, you might ask, would I ever want to deploy an 8-8 with 0 op cost? There are some late game scenarios where you will find that is actually a really useful body to just make life difficult for your opponent so that you have time to regain some tempo. And this is a tempo deck. But I have seen arguments about using the 175th in its place. I'm not sold. I don't like this card in Frontline, for the same reason that I was dubious about Thunderbolt, which is better in every way because it's an elite. I am even more dubious about this. The tempo loss on this is massive. Yes, it's 6-5, but I'd rather have a 4-4-0 op with no tempo loss. But you can try it. There's no reason not to give it a go if it's something that you want to experiment with. It's definitely an alternative option. As for that matter is the... you could also run the... is it 3 cost? I think it's 3 cost infantry. Just going hunting. You could also know it's the 4 cost infantry. If you don't mind going a bit slower, you could also make an argument for running the 5. Is it 5? It is 5. It's 5 nowadays, 121st, and this is because I don't run this very often. But I've also seen an argument for this because it's 1 turn, technically 2 turns, or 3 turns, depending on when you're playing it slower. And that's the thing I don't like. This is turn 6, not turn 4, and it's 2 turns slower. But it does give you outrage, which can get you retribution. I just don't think it's worth the reach, but I will talk about it because it is something I've seen discussed. Please hold while my client apparently adds a card that I don't want into my deck. If you have this bug, you might as well see this as one of the ways to deal with it. What have you added? You added an Alabama. If that happens, just have a quick look. It does happen occasionally, or I'll just bug out and add it. And finally, we have strategic bombing. Strategic bombing is just, you have this elite unless you are from a very early part of the game and rejoining very late, because this is an elite that you get for the level 12 US deck that you get awarded for Nation Reward, and it's just incredible. It's one of US's most versatile and useful elites, because not only can it clear the back line, doing some damage to give you pressure, it can just straight up be 6 cost, win the game. Always keep an eye on this deck. We want to make sure that this is the kind of weighting that we're seeing, because this is a tempo deck, and that means that we want to make sure that we are always able to be credit efficient and doing something with this deck. So this is one of the times when I will definitely suggest taking a look at your distribution and then thinking in a bit more detail. Remember that several of these cards cost 1 more than they look like they do on this chart because they have an operation cost and blitz. But you'll see that the weighting is very heavily to the early and mid game, and we don't really worry about a late game because our value comes from different places. But that's it, that's Frontline. Simple enough deck to kind of understand, and this is one of the best decks in the game for learning the fundamentals, because this deck just runs on the fundamentals of playing cards, which is looking at your hand, working out the best value units that you can play for the credits you and operate for the credits that you have available, and then trading them as effectively as possible on the board to give yourself continued advantage and pressure until such time as you have an opportunity to play a finisher and win the game. There's nothing more fundamental to a game like Cards than this. I think this is one of the most goated decks in the history of the game as a teaching tool, and I heartily recommend that everybody have this somewhere in their deck library. And also point people at this if they're new to the game, because this is, as I say, one of the best decks to learn the game on. It is also not an expensive deck. This deck runs a grand total, as you can see, of 4 elites and 10 specials, and as I've said, several of those can easily be replaced. which means this deck is not impossibly difficult to reach as a newer player. Anyway, that's it. That's the deck. That's the tactics. The next thing you'll see is me putting those tactics into practice in some matches that I recorded. They're not super... I didn't do anything super clever with this. I just had a quick run and actually did really well, which was a side effect. It might not be quite as efficient for everyone else. I think I only had maybe 2 losses in the run that I did trying to record videos for this, both of which I didn't bother including because they were getting high rolled by early OTK. Well, technically, one of them was buffs, which high rolled me super early, which is very boring to watch, and the other one was the inevitable Germany OTK at the moment. Instead, I just included a bunch of the games that looked most interesting from the remaining ones on it. But this deck did finish out my testing session with about an 80% win rate, but that is one tiny testing session. But I still think this deck would be more than good enough to get you to Field Marshal, and most importantly, sticks to the fundamentals of the game. Anyway, I hope you enjoy, hope you find it useful. As ever, if you do, please like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And if you can support the channel, especially with my life and things where they are at the moment, please do make sure to take a look and see if you can drop me something via Ko-Fi or via my Patreon. As always, take care of yourselves, be good human beings, and I will catch you next time. Right, Brett, so at the moment we kind of sort of assume buff or some kind of slow control. This is pretty much a complete ship. We don't have a 1-drop. That's a really unfortunate mulligan and mathematically not very likely. We should see a 1-drop, but we don't. No such thing as a perfect result. Ah, there we go. So we're doing a lot better now because we can start thinning. So 30-second is great for thinning because it's drawing itself. So in effect, I've played 2 cards and removed 2 from my deck. So this deck is, as you can see, thinning down quite nicely. We're back ahead, effectively getting pseudo-draw, which is good. Deck thinning is always positive. Okay, so we're going to get a bit of garrison spam, which, you know, we'll deal with, but it's not massively urgent. So we'll just finish thinning out the deck. See if our opponent wants to waste some removal. They might want to fire forward observers or something similar. If they don't, and they've got some problems, because we are, I mean, we have Blitzkrieg in hand, but they don't know that. So obviously we'll turn off one of the garrison, push forward. We are a credit short, which is a little inefficient, but we can cope. Half track's good because it lets us delay if they start throwing a lot of buffs onto one of their units. Or they're choosing not to, which is really good because that should allow us to activate Pathfinders for good value. Oh no, here we go. I was going to say we could have activated Pathfinders for good value if they'd left that at 2 defense, but they didn't. So we'll bounce it. Just make them respend the credits. We'll remove this guy. They're not likely to have much in the way of blitz, so we're not too worried about maintaining the front line super urgently. Kangaroo transport lets them hit, but they don't have the credit to push forward. So it counts as a tank. This is really important. So if you see Kangaroo transport, has blitz, has heavy armor. What it doesn't say on here, which I sort of wish it did, is counts as a tank. Because it still shows as infantry, which is irritating. So it's not, it's a tank, as we're about to demonstrate if we need to. Because the Hellcat does double damage against tanks. So it will do 8 damage, which is more than enough to deal with the 5. Okay, so Valentine was a good pull for them, but we can still deal with this. We just have to deal with it a different way. Got a few options. So I have 7 credits to play with. the most efficient way is probably going to be 5th Rangers and Panzer, as 5th Rangers will come down for 4 and operate for free. Then the Panzer can do the removal. Oh, actually, no, we can 5th Rangers and Pathfinders. So if we take 5th Rangers down to 0 operation cost, this will take this down to 2, which will allow us to hit it with Pathfinders and get the promotion. Buffs is not going to enjoy stall, so they're going to need to do something about the Pathfinders. Buffs wants to get bodies on the deck. We are taking a lot of damage to our HQ in the process, but they're going to have to make a priority of dealing with bodies. They found a buffs and a frontier force. Okay. It's a little awkward. For our first only does 2 damage in the support line, so one of the first things we're going to do, drop a Panzer. That lets us turn off one of these guys. Now, notably, it does not matter if you damage these. You have to attack them, which should, to a certain extent, impact the way that you choose to go about things. For example, it's why I am choosing to draw, so that I can put the Red Devils for the extra credit cost into the front line to make it awkward for them to deal with us. So they've now got 1 unit to focus on in their buffs. They're actually running Lay Force, which is legitimately not great. So this obviously, so Lay Force will go to a 3/3. So we know it will. So we need to drop something that will deal with a 3/3. Thankfully, we can quite easily. Not always the case, but we're lucky enough to have the answer in hand. This is going to be a long, protracted scrap that we are statistically going to struggle to win because they're just going to keep denying board presence. But if they focus continually on a single unit and we can find an M10, so no M10, but we can get the airborne down to remove the tank. And we can put some awkward damage into base. And critically, we have 2 units to their 1 unit of buffs. So again, they're just going to continue spamming down what they've got. Big HMS Formidable turn. We're just going to put as much as we have into the front line and turn this off. See if they have yet another answer. Again, we're just trying to apply continuous pressure because it's the only way that we can win this matchup. So the suppression is sort of less relevant. The massive stack of buffs on the buffs is very impressive. However, depending on... Yeah, we're okay. So we attack with the smallest value unit. And then we just win the game. Just keep pressure up. We've had Blitzkrieg in hand the whole way. So Soviets are not a great opening hand. Again, this is just a ship because we have no 1-drop. That sounds incredibly generic, but it's very true. Board presence is too important for us for the most part to do anything other than... I'm quite happy to take the draw here. Having a 2-4 in the front line and drawing is good. Drawing into Blitzkrieg is even better. Magnificent 7th. We're just gonna... Again, we're not going straight face. We're not... It's not all about pure face until we know that we can have a real impact. We kind of want to get to about 6 credits. So ideally we want to get the 5th Rangers and the Verbal Wind down and moved forward. And then be thinking about Blitzkrieg. So motor rifles is fine. We're just going to have to go through it. We can actually, we're going to want the 5th Rangers for that job. We're thinking to the future here. The 5th Rangers is going to do a good job of going through the 5th motor rifles. Or 15th motor rifles, I should say. I mean, it's not making any difference to us because we're not using reach damage. It's just putting a 2-5 guard in front of us. Procking another guard. No, procking Cobra. That's fine. So we'd like to attack with the Magnificent 7th because we'll get a buff to the top unit on our deck. We'll put another Magnificent 7th forward. Trade out here. We're not going to start trading into this because we're not going to deal with it until such time as we're just going for basically near lethal. Which should, unless they have a board clear, be next turn. We are 2 points off in effect because we can do the maths. Blitzkrieg is 12, but if you add Verbal Wind, we have lethal on board. So the Verbal Wind goes forward. We shift everything to 0 op cost, which gives us 15 plus unit value. So now we have to recalculate. So we would have 12 for the full procs on Blitzkrieg, plus 8, which... Okay, so our opponent is doing things very differently. So we're going to slow down a little. Yeah, so we'll trade here, which brings this down to basically then whatever you swing into, you're dead into. So that should static the guard. So you can take 2 bad trades, which would leave us still decent opening damage options and a well-statted half-track on the board. Playing Confusion, I mean, I don't think this was the right target. Unless you're converting it, which I assume you must be. I'm assuming our opponent has a way to destroy or convert this unit, because otherwise this was not the correct thing to... They don't. Okay, so this was not the correct unit to confuse. So we'll push forward. We'll draw, I think. Because, again, we are not in a rush. Because the trades for our opponent are terrible. Do we want to... We might as well trade off the guard to make our opponent have to take 2 bad trades. So now we don't have to worry about half-track cost. Okay. Depending on what we top deck, that might have been a less than well-considered move from our opponent. I went for what looked like the bigger threat. Doesn't have blitz, unfortunately. However, it's not lethal. However, now our opponent needs to trade out 4 units in 1 turn. They can heal too, but they would just die. So they have to trade. Alpini's fine. So we'll half-track, make them pay for the Alpini again. I'm not going to M10 because I want to M10 next turn. So if I half-track now, we do some damage to their HQ, but not actually enough to win. So next turn they will redeploy the Alpini. But with the half-track, we can still find... the half-track is a threat. Even if they clear the front line, we can still find lethal off the M10 because we still have the credits to operate the half-track. So it's over. It was over on multiple levels because we top-decked the 101st, but we'll play it out as though we hadn't. Okay, so Germany. Number 1 rule at the minute, go fast. Has general rule, we don't want to see double blitzkrieg and we don't want to see double 30 seconds, so we'll ship 3. This isn't bad. We've got 32nd into 35T, and it's good in this case because route doesn't answer the issue because we'll still have an infantry to activate the 35. So we get the thinning, and they might route the 32nd, but even if they do, we still have an infantry. I didn't find the route. Ooh, trips. That's useful. And triple 35T is good, because we could thin them through a lot of their routes here. Jagdpanzer, okay. So, I mean, they're going to have to burn their Jagdpanzer in effect, so I think I'd rather just take... So, I'm just going to take the face damage. We're going to stay aggressive and keep thinning. If they want to convert one of the cards in our hand, that's fine. If they hit Blitzkrieg, it would be pretty bad, but hitting one of the Choco Boys makes basically no odds, and they hit the same card twice, which is pretty bad for them. We'll use Pathfinders to remove the Jagdpanzer, which lets us do face, go forward. We could have spent this, but we're saving this. We can use this in a minute. It can give us a really good turn. Oh, it's Navy burn. This is why they're desperately trying to pull us off the front line. Interesting. And that boy gets pushed, which is good. We can activate here. 7, 8, 9. We get 10 damage. We make it 11. Not quite enough to be lethal. So let's buff the Choco boys. Oh, that's much better. That gives us a much stronger turn next turn, so yeah, we're okay holding. No point pushing these up because they're just going to want to trade it out with something with Blitz if they have it. They need to answer because it's lethal on board, and they can't, so we take the win. So, more Germany. We'll ship everything barring the 109th, because the 109th means we have a drop. As it turns out, we actually get a really good mulligan, but we are going second, which isn't great. I don't really like going second into this. We'll drop Choco. So we drop the Choco boys, by the way, because this forces a bad trade if they want to use the Fiat. Because the Fiat effectively trades 1 for 1. But they don't want it to. They'd like to get a better trade out of it, so they'll go face, which is predictable. Okay, so this is going to be some form of burn, which is not a massive shock, so just push up. So now the Fiat starts to have to think about, does it want to trade? Because that's now 3 damage to face every turn. Okay, but that doesn't change the 3. So suppressing this doesn't help. It doesn't help the one that's in the front line. The buff is permanent. The Matchy comes down. That's fair. Do we just neuter the Matchy down to a 2-2? We could. But a 3-2 into the front line. We can thin and do some damage to face. I'd like to get more frontline presence, definitely. So I think we'll just go a bit wider at the moment, make it awkward to trade us out. Generally, keeping just a bit ahead on board presence early game is going to pay off for this deck. Especially, okay, so they're going to drop another big Matchy. Now, we do have strat bombing coming up. So the M10 here brings this down to a 2-2. Put another 3 damage into face. But now they have to start to think about answering. I'm going to suppress. Saves them a point of damage. I presume they're doing it for the draw. Play the Arado for the draw. Okay, so now we start thinking about how we trade. We've got 5 credits to operate, and we need to take out that number of things. So for 2 credits, we can take out the 3-3. Another 2 credits takes out another 1, leaving us 1 credit, which is less than ideal. 9. Or we could just take lethal. That's also a thing if we're concentrating. Always check your maths. My first maths didn't have us there, but we are actually there. Germany. This is actually a really good opening hand. It's taking time to make sure there's nothing that I think I might want to change, but I don't think there is. 109th. Then turn 2, ideally Red Devils or Panzer 35, depending on where we're at. Turn 3, yeah, we're in good place, we're in good shape. We are on the draw, but Germany's not particularly fast deck at the moment in general, so that should be not that much of an issue. We play Red Devils, but since they don't have anything on the board, we're going to go with the Panzer just for aggression. Then next turn we can use 7th. Red Devils is a better play if we want to make trades awkward, but at the moment we're not needing to. Defend in depth will hit the buff, yep, which is fine. So we'll run the 7th up. Take the morale damage, not something we're overly worried about. We're around long enough for our resources to matter, we've lost anyway. We have Blitzkrieg in hand. So we can Devils, push, drop the extra Panzer. They're down to 9, so they have to remove 2 bodies to survive. And even that wouldn't do it, but they don't necessarily know it because we have 2 consecutive Blitzkrieg turns. So 1 down, go for the heal. I'll take them to 17. So what have we got? We have 6 on board, plus 9 is only 14. However, we've got a second Blitzkrieg turn afterwards, so we can Devils, push up, play the first Blitzkrieg. So now they need to find heal again. Obviously, normally you would save the Blitzkrieg for certain lethal. They're going to dig for an answer now. Don't find it, dead on board, and we move on. Japan. So once again, there's a lot of ship here. We will actually not keep Blitzkrieg in this instance because we're going to want to be able to land some extra trades. Getting the 109th is huge. However, as usual, we want trading bodies first. The advantage of the 109th will come later if it comes at all against an aggro deck. Because what we have to be able to do is trade the issues in front of us out. Trade out the shock. And thin. We will take some HQ damage, it's just a matter of balancing out how much we take. Okay, so they get an extra point. That was an interesting choice. Will Pathfinders here. There are a couple of things they could drop that might have the reach, but they're going to need a blitz tank. No, they're going as far as using commit the reserves, which is fine. So Verbal Wind plus for freedom actually survives this trade, which is, believe it or not, huge into this deck. Because now we have another trade and they are so far behind on card. Like, they found no draw, and if we can grab the front line, yeah, I know they're cooked.